So, we've been looking at shadows and reflections, and basically how they are caused by light. But now we have to look at them on how similar they are. And this is basically they're all caused by light, and they're not the actual image, but rather a representation of the actual image. In this sense, it means this. Oh, it's not the actual object, but an image of the actual object. So there is a pre existing object from which the shadow and the reflection is cast. We assumed that this, or rather the entire universe, is basically inside a prism, and this is because we just placed the assumption that within this prism, the light within it is reflected back inside whenever it got to the edge of the surface, or rather the face of the surface. So anytime it got to the face of the prism, it got reflected back into the prism, and this could continue consistently. That's on reflection. But then there's the shadow side of it. Since it's not going outside of the prism, it's getting reflected back into the prism. But in the same way, it casts a shadow. So we can assume this shadow is outside the prism, but then it's displayed within the prism, or rather, not displayed, but it affects the image inside the prism. Because whenever light gets to an object, then it will cast a shadow. Yeah, it gets absorbed by the object, and the part that hasn't hit the object essentially goes on, and it illuminates the area around you. But the part that has been exposed to the object is what casts the shadow. So the shadow and the reflection, they're both in 2 dimensions. A shadow is, well, pretty direct, because once a shadow is cast, it's a rather perfect 2-dimensional representation. And for the reflection, it's within the mirror itself. The mirror has a reflective surface, and you can't walk into a mirror. It's not a door where you can go inside it, or at least we haven't discovered how. But yeah, the reflective surface just redirects the light that has come towards it. So it's this particular example, because the mirror itself is also an object. So if you have a square mirror, then it will cast a square shadow. That is, if the angles are right. So yeah, even angles affect the perception of the reflection and the shadow. But our focus is on the fact that these are 2-dimensional. So they are 2-dimensional representations of the 3-dimensional object. A shadow essentially is the 2-dimensional depiction of when light is absorbed and not reflected back. And a reflection, the image in the mirror, is a representation of the three-dimensional, when all the light that is coming out of the three-dimensional object gets reflected in almost 100% completion. In this way, when we look into a mirror, we can see everything that's around us. You can see yourself, you can see what's next to you, what's around you, and so on. But it's two-dimensional because behind let's say, a typical mirror, it's glass with the silver coating that's behind it. So that silver coating, in it of itself, we can't see that it's two-dimensional. It has a thickness, even if it's a molecule thick. But either way, it's the reflection itself that's the two-dimensional, that is two-dimensional. So that's how they have the relationship. They're both two-dimensional. It's just that one is formed by complete, or rather mostly, absorbing the light, while the other is reflecting almost all the light. Yeah. And now on the universe itself. So we've said that there has to be an object that casts this shadow and also casts their reflection. And from the beginning, rather, for the most part, I mentioned God of being the only existing being. Yeah, the only existing being entirely. We're just branches of Him. The reflection. And so, what of the shadows? Well, when He casts a shadow, it causes the dimensions, because we can't, he's practically everything. So he's also the shadow itself. He's the light that is casting the shadow. And just from that, we see that even before we started having the light that propagated to the prism, He already divided Himself. So we can assume basically it's the thought of it. Well, basically, if you're a Christian, you've read that He said and it was. So assume this is inside His head, and He's gauging that this particular universe would be in this particular way, and so on. So He'll make the assumption that it has to be in this particular way. So the light itself, I don't know how we can describe it, but let's say sight, what He sees. So when we'll put in the Big Bang in this particular context, the moment that the Big Bang happened, it's basically, we can assume that that's the initial thought. That was the initial thought. He'd think that everything exists. And what is this everything? And from that moment, he starts breaking it down. So saying that there will be matter and antimatter. But then that's before, of which essentially he'd conclude that there will be existence, and this existence will be in a particular space, rather time. That's the time and space we discussed in the previous video. But okay, so he thought up, and then the Big Bang. So that's existence in non-existence. And the more he looked into this existence, the broader it became. And the broader it became, the more divergent it got. But just as in the previous video, I was speculating that existence comes up, gets to a peak, then falls to non-existence. Speculative, yeah, I'm speculating because I'm trying to focus it entirely on accepted physics. Anyway, so existence would come to a certain point and then fall to a certain point. But this in it of itself doesn't mean that it's a continuing cycle. It probably happened once, but then this one time occurrence appears to be infinite. So yeah, so as we were saying, it rises to full existence and then drops to complete inexistence. But even in complete inexistence, there's possibility, and this possibility ignites existence to start coming to be again. So it's a sort of chain reaction where upon complete existence, inexistence starts to dominate, and upon complete inexistence, existence starts to dominate. And this essentially, here we introduce the theory. Yeah. It stated that time is the initial dimension, and after time, there's space, because change has to happen. So in order for change to happen, it has to happen with the rate of change. That is that time. Duration is how long the change has taken. So time in itself is the rate of change. And where this rate of change is occurring is within space. So in the previous video, I was stating that time is the initial dimension, but then there's space, because if change is occurring, where is this change occurring? And then we have to conclude that space has to be present in order for time to actually take effect. So as much as time is the initial dimension, it's still dependent on space. So I guess I'll have to retract the whole notion that time is the initial dimension and replace it with the fact that time and space occur at the same time. Anyway, essentially, time will exist with space, so they are entangled. So we can assume that they are the initial particles, and the initial particle itself that is broken apart for there to be time, and then the other portion is space. So the initial particle in itself is time-space, and how time-space works is actually different from how time and how space works. But again, they're all linked. And from here, I guess I'd prefer, let me say, I prefer to equate it to God's, is it Trinature? The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit, in that they are the same. It's one God, but three. Yeah. So time, space, time, and space. So time space in itself is different from what time is and what space is, but they are unique. So yeah, basically they are unique in each of themselves, but we still have to break them apart to study their effects. The same way God described himself as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, trying to explain a single being in three states, or rather three perspectives. So yeah,